Hello everybody, I'm Professor Claire Gwinnett and I'm a Professor in Forensic Environmental Science in the School of Law, Policing and Forensics at Staffordshire University. My area of expertise is in trace evidence, and this is the analysis and interpretation of things like hairs, fibres, glass and paint in a crime scene scenario. One part of my area of expertise is understanding how textiles damage during different types of case scenario. So for example, in murders and in sexual assaults. The way that fabrics can change is called textile damage, and this can tell us a lot about a case. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this now and give you an example of the type of things that we do at Staffordshire University and the kind of things that you can learn in this subject area during the course. So let's have a look at the different types of textile damage that we can investigate as forensic scientists. We generally think of textile damage as coming from one of three different categories. So that can be either mechanical damage, chemical damage, or heat type damage. Now, starting with mechanical damage, we can see lots of different types. And that can be everything from general wear and tear that has nothing to do with a crime scene scenario, or it might be actually due to what's happened within a case. So this might include the use of some sort of object or weapon that has been used to inflict an injury and therefore at the same time cause damage to the garments or the clothing that a victim was wearing. The types of different implement that we might see in forensic science include firearms, which is where we might get ballistic damage on the textile and on the garment. We might also see the use of a knife, which is where we are going to see stab type damage or slash type damage to fabric. We might also see some more unusual types of weapon use, such as a crossbow, which gives a very indicative or very characteristic damage type pattern. It can look like a Y shape, in fact, so it's very easy to identify the weapon type there. But when we think about mechanical damage, we're also including things like scavenging animals. So if a body has been dumped and it has been exposed outside, we might get scavengers to the scene. For in the UK, that might be the likes of foxes, but in other countries, that's the likes of wolves or even dingoes. And the teeth can cause mechanical damage onto the body, but also onto the garments that victim's wearing. In heat type damage, we generally see this as exposure or being close to some sort of heat source, and a lot of the time that is naked flame, so a fire. We see this a lot in things like arson investigations where fires have been deliberately set, and also in accidental fires. In these type of damage analysis, we want to know the cause of this. So we want to understand whether someone was involved in setting a fire or whether in fact they were just a bystander or they've come in contact with a legitimate source of heat, such as your iron when you're ironing your clothes at home. Now, chemical damage is something that we might associate with something we now know as acid attacks or chemical attacks, and we've seen this become a lot more common in the UK over the last 5 years. This is where the likes of battery acid that can be used in cars, but also household items such as bleach are being used in order to try and intimidate or inflict injury on another individual. And during those types of assaults, that can cause damage to not only the person, but also the garments that they're wearing. And that can help reconstruct not only what type of chemical has been used, but also the order of events. So what we call the reconstruction of events. So that can help tell us how many people were involved and whether this is one or two different chemical types or whether there's more people involved and the action that they've used whilst actually creating this attack. So let's think about what type of information that textile damage can tell an investigator in a case. Now, the amount and type of information that you might be able to gather from textile damage is of course dependent on whether it's mechanical, chemical or heat, because there'll be different types of questions that are being asked in those types of cases. But let's look at mechanical damage for a second and the types of questions that an investigator might be asked. So on the screen here we have two types of mechanical damage. And a question that might be asked of this type of damage is whether this has been torn, and maybe torn accidentally or deliberately, or whether it has been cut with an implement, and that might be a knife or another sharp object. Now, I just want you to take a second to look at these two damage types and see whether you can come to a conclusion of what you would say. So whether you think these have been torn or whether they've been cut. And a lot of the things that we might think about are logical thinking, but in court we need to be able to give an explanation of why we might come to a conclusion. So hopefully you identified the one on the left as being cut, and this has been cut using a sharp implement. Now at the moment we need a bit more information about that to be able to identify whether that sharp implement is a knife. But some of the features here that are going to help tell us that are the fact that we have got some neat edges, that the fibres on these two cut sides are what we call under planar array, means they line up. So we've got that neat and there's very little fraying there. We will also see that the direction of that cut is not along the length or across the fabric type. So we can see the along the length and we can see along the width by looking at the weave pattern that's present on that purple fabric. And we can see this is a slight angle to that, which is something that's a little bit unusual if this was going to be a tear. Because if we had a tear type damage, tearing along the length or the width of the fabric is its weakest point. So we'd expect it to follow that. Now on the right hand side we have a tear type pattern, and this is something that we might see that's deliberately done by a manufacturer. So this is on denim fabric, and you may have at home some jeans that have already got a type of damage like this that's been deliberately put there for a certain effect. But as forensic investigators, we're interested in whether this has been occurred or been created in a different way, and whether a tear has been deliberately created by an individual, or whether in fact it has occurred because it's abraded against something, so it's come in contact with a rough surface. And that might tell us about what's happened to that fabric and the person wearing that fabric during that incident. Now, by trying to identify whether something is a cut or a tear, that can really help corroborate eyewitness testimonies and also victim testimonies. Also identify whether these are untrue. So being able to get as much information about these particular damage types will really try to help reconstruct events. A very important piece of information that forensic scientists will try to identify is the weapon type and also the particular weapon that might have been used in a case. Now, textile damage is excellent for this because it allows us to be able to see the features of the textile damage without them being changed over time and allow us to be able to compare those to different weapons. This is by far better than trying to identify the weapon that's been used from wounds from a victim, because as the victim starts to maybe decompose and the body changes, the subsequent wounds that were present there will also change. So it makes it difficult to identify particular features from a weapon. Now let's have a little look at knives and let's see the different types that we might expect to see in a case. So as you can imagine, there are lots of different types of knives that can be used in stabbing incidences. There can be lots of shapes, sizes, lengths of blade, thicknesses of blade. Some blades have serrations, some are smooth, and all of these will create different features in terms of the damage pattern that they will create if they're used in an assault. Now, what's important for the forensic investigator is to try and understand what all these different knives that are present on this screen, what kind of damage they will create, and how we can link that back to a particular weapon type. So understanding about the blade, the thickness of these, and then the different features that we might see needs to be informed by research. And that is something at Staffordshire University we try to help inform and we try to help police forces with. Identifying the weapon type, and particularly in this case the knife type that's been used in an attack, is really important to police forces, because police forces will use this information as intelligence information when they're trying to search for the weapon and maybe survey or mass search people's homes. And some of these knives are really unusual. So what we're seeing here is something that has been called a zombie knife, because it very much looks like some of the types of knives you might see in a zombie movie. These are incredibly unusual and they have very particular features. And if there was subsequent damage that was created from one of these on a textile, we would want to know what that would look like, so we're able to identify even particular knives such as this. So how do we as forensic scientists help provide that information about how we link textile damage on different fabrics to particular knives so that we can give that information to the police? Well, we use something called Reconstruction Experiments, and this is where we will take a variety of different knives, and some of these might be commonly used in cases, or some of these might be more unusual, and we will create in a controlled manner textile damage on different fabrics in order for us to be able to identify the different features that these knives create. Now on the screen here we have Lauren Yar, and she is one of our current level 6 students who has conducted a research project in analysing and creating a stab damage database for the purposes of police forces to identify weapon type. She worked with Staffordshire Police, who we have got a formal forensic partnership with, in order to be able to get access to seized weapons that have been given up in an amnesty. And this really makes her research realistic, because that enables her not just to use commonly found knives that you might find in the home, but it also includes weapons that are actually used in crimes. So what she did here is create a controlled manner of creating this textile damage using ballistic gel. And she created multiple patterns in order then to document, so she used photography, but then she also measured these and looked at any key features to see whether, for example, a particular curved blade, like we see on the middle here at the bottom, whether that creates maybe more of a frayed pattern than a smoother, more straight blade. So what we're seeing here on the screen is one of Lauren's textile damage creations. So this is from using one of the knives from Staffordshire Police, and she has created 3 stab damage patterns on one of her fabrics. Now what we are interested in here is the type of features that could maybe link to that particular weapon. So she was looking at the length of the severance, the width of the severance, to be able to see whether that actually matched up with the dimensions of the blade. But also interested in whether you get more of a frayed or curling effect depending on how sharp the knife is. And Lauren found some really interesting results. She was able to identify a link between the different weapons and the textile damage on certain fabric types because of their length and width, and also some of the other features. And she's actually been able to present that work to the Deputy Chief Constable and the Head of Forensics at Staffordshire Police, because this is something that the police force might be able to use in their investigations. As part of both the forensic science and the forensic investigation degree at Staffordshire University, you will get a chance to be able to learn about textile damage. I will teach you the theory first of all about how we use textile damage in casework and how we interpret this form of evidence in order to be able to reconstruct crimes and understand what's happened. And I'll use different case examples that have happened in order to be able to show how it's been used before. And we will critique how it's been used and see how we can improve this type of evidence in the future. You'll also get a chance to be able to apply that knowledge in a practical setting where you'll get to examine different types of textile damage and try to reconstruct exactly what's happened there, like we do in real casework, where we might only have a small amount of information about that case, and we need to be able to understand what the textile damage can tell us. So hopefully you've got a bit of a taster now on what textile damage is in forensic work, and the fact that you'll be able to have a chance to be able to learn these skills and apply them in a really realistic way here at Staffs. I'm really looking forward to meeting you, and I really hope I get to teach you this very interesting area of forensic science in the future.